Hey everybody, it's Tuesday.
And welcome to this week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily, and thank you for being here with us tonight. It's been kind of the most normal part of fishing that we've seen in a really long time, at least here in the Midwest. We're in Wisconsin. Summer has settled in and we have seen a lot of heat. So, fish are, some are on weed lines, we're looking for those are growing up, but actually we're seeing fish kind of skip right to, being in the deep. And I guess I'm also referring to panfish here, especially crappies that we were looking for this past weekend. So looking forward to that again this coming up weekend here.
And it's that time of year when big baits and all fish get along very nicely. We were running number 5 flicker sheds for some really nice perch this weekend. That's always fun when you can run hard baits and you can catch some nice dinner. That's really cool change of pace. So
that's absolutely true. We also fished 2 really unique bodies of water this week. One was almost an entirely rock basin. And due to that, almost no weeds at all. It was a very hard bottom. And so fish were doing, different things a little bit, as opposed to, places that are full of weeds and have defined weed lines or maybe a bunch of boat traffic. So with that, we're interested in hearing how fishing is by you. So let us know where you're at. Come check in. Let us know what you're fishing for this weekend, because I'm interested in hearing about that.
And we also welcome all kinds of questions and comments, so throw that in the chats. I'm sure our guests would be happy to answer all of your hard walleye questions about Lake Winnipeg.
So with that, let's bring him on in here. So Glen Talbot, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on tonight.
Yeah.
So first hard question here, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I live in Manitoba, just south of Winnipeg. I've got a wonderful family, 3 daughters, a beautiful wife. Love to spend my time fishing and hunting whenever I'm not working. So usually every other weekend or a couple days during the week, if I can get some time off, try to hit the lake, whether it's during ice fishing or open water, and try to team up with some buddies and have a good time and not take anything too seriously.
Well, and actually that's really cool to hear, because you live in a destination where a lot of people try to vacation to.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the wintertime, we're very fortunate. We live just, half an hour away from probably one of the premier walleye spots, in North America or in the world. So Lake Winnipeg is a wonderful place. And I know a lot of our friends who are joining us on the call tonight are used to going ice fishing on Lake Winnipeg. But we're going to talk a little bit about open water fishing on Lake Winnipeg a little bit tonight too, because I know sometimes we forget to talk about that as well. So
that's excellent. Like, where do we start?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. A number of years ago, I took up ice fishing a little more seriously and, hit Lake Winnipeg, the South Basin specifically. As I said earlier, teamed up with some buddies and bought all the expensive equipment. And then, as we know, with the pandemic in the last 18 months, we haven't been able to travel outside the province, which is, not only for yourselves, but for ourselves. It's kind of put a damper on all the walleye tournaments. We're not able to go to Saskatchewan, Ontario. So this year, a lot of my buddies and I, we've been spending some more time on Lake Winnipeg and hitting it this spring specifically. And we've had a lot of success, not only on the typical spots where we fish on the east side, which a lot of anglers are used to fishing in the fall in Pine Falls area. But we've also been focusing a lot more on the west side as well, up near Gimli, Manitoba. And like I said, the fishing's been incredible throughout most of the spring.
I'm wondering, I guess I have a question for you. So we're hearing a lot from people in the Midwest here, and I guess even across our country, talking about, even with the effects of COVID, that there's a lot of new anglers in the field. Is that something that you see true in Canada as well?
Absolutely. And I can tell you my favorite tackle store here in Winnipeg, every time I go in, I'm always waiting for whatever is going to come out. But there's a shortage in product right across North America because, as you mentioned, so many people have taken up fishing, and being outdoors in general. So whether it's tackle, gear, it's been kind of hard to get in the last few months. But we're fortunate. We've got a really good tackle store here in Winnipeg, so we've been fortunate.
Well, and there's a few lucky people out there that have gotten kind of into making their own tackle, and that's always kind of a fun thing to hear about, on social media and stuff. But are you finding that the extra boat traffic is affecting your fishing then?
It's a good question. I don't think on Lake Winnipeg too much boat traffic is going to be an issue. It's a big body of water. But what I have heard from some friends who have been fishing some smaller lakes in Manitoba is that they're seeing an increase with people who have pontoon boats. And pontoon boats can create as big a wake as some of the wake boats that we see on the lakes today. And, they're all powered, of course, with 250 horse Verados and whatnot. So, they've got 15 people or however many people they can get on the pontoon. So I have heard some comments that the boat traffic in some of the smaller lakes has been extreme.
Yeah, and shout out to boat safety too, because I agree with you. I was seeing some pontoons out there loaded with more people that I can almost count as I'm going by. And, it's kind of funny to sit and laugh about, but you'd also hate to have a tough situation with that many people around because that would be that much harder to solve. So, shout out to being safe on the water while we're having fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the interesting things here in Manitoba was that for a long time, we weren't able to have anyone in our boat who wasn't part of your immediate family because of the restrictions. So, that was kind of different because there wasn't a lot of people fishing, in big groups at the early part of the spring, especially out, as I mentioned, on Lake Winnipeg and some of those higher traffic spots. We saw a lot of people fishing either with their wife or maybe one of their children, and that was it. Or typically you'd have a boatload of people, right? So.
Yeah, that's for sure. And a little patience at the launch goes a long way, because then that would mean, I imagine, a lot of people try to launch their boat on their own where they would normally have their buddy to, help hold a rope or pull that boat out or whatever system they have set down. So I guess when you see these people out there, are there any common mistakes as far as fishing is going, or some of these people seem to be kind of on the right track?
You know what? I think sometimes when people are fishing and they don't understand their electronics, sometimes you see people with their their iPilot, and maybe they're not paying attention to the remote, and all of a sudden, boom, there goes the boat, and then you're looking up and you've got a boat coming at you pretty fast, especially when you're fishing in current spots. But overall, we're I don't see too many of that out where we fish. Really fortunate to have a good group of anglers. Most often, there's some of the boat launches we have. There's only one launch, so sometimes you have to wait a while. Last weekend we were out fishing, and my wife and a friend's wife, they both backed the boat up in the trailer. They did a fabulous job, and we're seeing more and more of that. And it's great to get, to get more and more women, not only operating boats, but doing the whole thing. And we're seeing a lot of that now. So it's great.
That is really great. I'm laughing to myself because I've actually had people, Josh backs the trailer in and I'm in the boat and I can drive it off. You just get it to float and then you just hang out there and pick them up. But I've literally had people wait at the boat launch to watch me mess this up. It's just so funny. So I love hearing your story. Even people backing in the boat, that's not my strength, but I can certainly handle the boat. And I guess that's why I have Josh. But cool that you get out there with your wife to do that.
Yeah, well, I've got a few buddies that still struggle backing in the boat, so we like to tease each other whenever we can. Some of them have mirrors that are not really conducive to backing trailers into the water, and sometimes people put their seats all the way back, and so we like to tease some of our close buddies about how they back in. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So then, once you are on the water, I guess what is your go-to for fishing?
Well, you know what? One of the common baits that's used up on Lake Winnipeg is spot tail shiners. We get them frozen, obviously, salted frozen minnows, but they've been hard to come by the last few years. So that probably has a little bit to do as well with more people fishing, especially ice fishing. Like last year, probably seen more Canadians ice fishing than any time before, just because of the pandemic. So you know what? I would be lying if I didn't say that we're using a lot of shiners. But this past spring, just because, as you know, when it's really warm outside, managing your bait's not always easy. So this year we spent a lot more time actually using soft plastics. And you know what? There's advantages to using soft plastics. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't use salted minnows or whatever we're using, but there's a lot of advantages of using soft plastics. You can fish the bait a little more aggressively. It's a bigger profile oftentimes, and if you like to spend a little bit of time getting organized. You know, I was just kind of thinking about this, just having a bait box kind of ready with some pre-tied plastics, you know, kind of goes a long way. So if you do have, you know, a good day out in the lake, you've got some jigs ready with some paddle tails on that you can go to right away. And that seems to have worked really well. And I think one thing about this spring specifically, when you see a lot of the times on your graphs, whether you're using like a live view or you're using just regular 2D sonar, a lot of times you see those bait balls going through. And this year specifically, if you saw a bait ball 5 or 6 feet suspended, you know, you could drop your bait kind of somewhere where you saw that bait ball, and you didn't really have to do much. And all of a sudden, you know, you've got a pretty strong bite. And fortunately, lots of times they were some really nice walleye, you know, whether as a, you know, 25 plus inches, you know, maybe, you know, 6-7 pounds, and oftentimes even bigger than that. So we used a lot of soft plastics this year just because I can't stand managing bait when it's 30 degrees outside, 30 degrees Celsius, by the way.
Yeah, that makes a really good point. Well, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but is it across Canada that live bait is not to be used?
You know what? It is by province. Here in Manitoba, interestingly, the province is looking at eliminating live bait in specific categories. So there was actually an email that came out to most of the anglers who are registered asking for our input on whether or not we support, you know, live bait. And, you know, we know that there's always a concern with invasive species. You know, we've got a pretty serious problem on Lake Winnipeg with zebra mussels, you know, and then there's obviously other lakes that have problems as well with invasive species. So we appreciate the fact that we want to limit that, but, you know, it's not just as easy. You have to think about the economy. There's a lot of people who make money selling live bait, and we want to support all of those people who are good stewards of the conservation. So.
Well, and certainly all of that is true, but hopefully you can also support your local plastics bait makers.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, spread the love around, because I love that box that you picked up and showed us, because with plastics, you know, that allows you to do a lot of things. You know, in some cases that's match the hatch. You can choose a size, you can choose that shape, you know, what tail, the paddle, or, you know, whatever. And you can really create something that fish will bite on. But even better than that, sometimes with plastics, you can create something almost more attractive than the minnow. You know, sometimes match the hatch only goes so far, and you have to like be the best of the hatch out there. And that's something that, you know, plastics allows.
Absolutely. Well, one of my favorite jigs this year, I'm going to see if I can hold this up. This here is a Smeltonator jig. It's a 1/2 ounce jig. And this is actually a jig that was designed by Brian Gustafson, who's actually a Striker Pro staff as well, from Ontario. And it's matched up here with a Kitech 4-inch Easy Shiner. And it's a great little technique. It's got as you can see here, the tail's pretty floppy. And the only problem with some of these baits is that they're a little too soft, and sometimes you get a couple strong bites and your tail's gone. But as I mentioned earlier, that's why it's nice to have your day box with pre-tied, so that you don't have to worry about fishing that poor plastic with a tail that's lost. You can go back and tie one up real quick. So yeah, these you know, these 1/2 ounce jigs are really important, because as I mentioned earlier, part of the issue with Lake Winnipeg, when the fishing's really good, usually it's because the current is strong. But with the current, you need to have a heavy jig, and you need to usually use a specific style of jig, like a current cutter jig. And so fishing a 1/2 ounce jig is not really the type of jig you think about fishing in a finesse style way anyways. You know, we don't think about 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce or 1 ounce jigs fishing in that kind of finesse way. So oftentimes it's just about making sure you can get it in front of their eyes, and then let the bait do its job. And usually that's all you need to do.
Well, and I love how you bring up, you know, the fact that current plays a big part in that, because that is something that a lot of anglers don't have to really think about. And so choosing baits, you know, becomes a whole lot different. And I like how you're talking about having to balance presentation with the weight and, you know, all of that against the current, because there's a lot that goes into that. There
is. You know, the first time I went up to Lake Winnipeg on the east side I think it was a couple springs ago, you know, I was sitting there with a 3/8 ounce jig or a 1/4 ounce jig. My jig was gone, right? And I'm thinking, like, how am I going to feel a bite, or how am I going to feel bottom? So, you know, you kind of go up better prepared the next time and bring some good quality tackle. And, you know, it's not easy to find good quality 3/4 ounce jigs. So we're fortunate, as I said earlier, Lake of the Woods headquarters here in Winnipeg. They sell all the striker gear. They've got some really, really good soft plastics and some great jigs. So make sure you check them out.
That's awesome. And then I'm seeing the plastic that you're holding up is kind of a green and white, minnow split pattern.
Yep.
Is that your go-to color, or are there other colors that you like as well?
Yeah, anything that's natural, anything that kind of resembles that spot tail shiner look. But I mean, again, I've fished with some things that are like the perch pattern here that's worked really well. Some white, sometimes the water's stained depending on what time of the year. So sometimes just having something that's white, they get to see it, glow in the dark. I'm not sure if I believe in glow in the dark jigs, but anything that gets me permission to buy some more tackle, I've always got an excuse, as I'm sure most people do.
Oh my gosh. And I loved your white jig and white plastic that you held up. That's something that looks like I would put together. That's for sure. I think it even had an underspin on it. Yeah, there you go. That's great. But I'm also really impressed with, that perch that you held up with that pink head, because that's a little bit like what I was talking about. You can match that hatch, but in that case, see, that's better than that hatch.
Well, I've got some great friends following tonight, and, whether it's on Lake of the Woods or Lake Winnipeg in the fall, or pink and white seems to be a great color. And, again, we're always looking for quality gear. So we've got some friends that pour their own jigs, with some solid Gamakatsu hooks. And, it really helps when you can have quality gear. So pink and white seems to be a really, really common color. And I had a buddy last weekend who was actually using a St. Croix Avid Pearl rod because, his wife catches all the fish on it. So he was using that rod, and I think he might even had a pink and white jig on there as well. And he was doing really well. So nothing wrong with pink.
That's awesome. I swear fish like pink.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, you know what? It's, going back to some of the electronics too. And, some of our guys that we fish with and gals that we fish with on a regular basis, we've talked a lot about live view and, whether it's the Mega Live that's coming out from Humminbird or Pen Optics. And, sometimes as walleye fishermen, we like to just look at the vertical jigging. But this year, we've learned a lot from some of the bass guys bass guys are obviously some of the best walleye fishermen we have here in Manitoba and Ontario. And, sometimes we don't really use that technology to find the fish. We're a little more worried about the vertical up and down jigging like we would use for a flasher during ice fishing. And, we've really tried to expand that knowledge and use that live view for trying to see where the fish are. And then, like I said, when you see those bait balls going through, just knowing that they're 5 or 6 feet suspended, it really dials it in for you, right? So
that is really excellent. The technology, between great baits and knowing where fish are, it's like some days it feels like the fish don't even have a chance.
Yeah, there's with mapping available today and all the new technology and with the trolling motors, and gosh, you know what? Like, we're spoiled today, right?
Well, that's a really great point, because that map making, man, we fish a few lakes around here that are just small, and some people are on them, but there's people wondering why we're fishing where we're at, because it's like, well, maybe we know of a hump that exists that isn't on a map. That's pretty excellent. I gotta agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. One of the other rigs that I wanted to show tonight is a Ned rig. And, again, just learning from some of our bass friends, it's interesting when you fish a tournament and you're talking to some bass guys and they're like, oh, I was fishing a bass tournament last weekend. I couldn't get those measly walleye off my lures. And I'm like, what do you mean? You were catching walleye? Where were you catching the walleye, right? And I'm like, oh, we were catching walleye on a lot of bass techniques. And I have a lot of friends that catch a lot of walleye on Lake of the Woods with a Ned rig. And it's just, who would have thought, right, that we'd be using that kind of jig and that kind of plastic to catch walleye? But it works. It's unbelievable, actually.
That is really amazing. I'm trying to think of who we were talking to a while back, and weren't they talking about they were using spinners for bass and they kept catching walleye? Gosh, I wish I could remember if that was you. Shout out to you, because you're awesome. But I love that story, because sometimes you're out and you're doing something and you find what works, and it might not be what's totally expected, but, sometimes that's why it is what works, is because maybe that's not what other people are out there doing. And I've got to say, I'm hearing quite a few people talk about Ned rigs this year, especially, but it is a lot coming from that bass world. I've heard a person or two, try to sneak it into, the panfish world, some big bluegills, but I'm actually also loving it for the walleye application. So that's really an interesting thing to bring out.
Yeah, absolutely. Last, I think it was 2 weekends ago, we were fishing out on somewhere in Lake of the Woods. I'm going to tell you, it was in Shoal Lake, and we were actually throwing Ned rigs, and we caught a couple crappie. Actually, it was kind of interesting. Like I never would have thought I would have caught a crappie, but on a Ned rig. But yeah, you know what? I just think the way the bait falls, it's a light jig, and just that presentation, it's just something different. But yeah, just surprising how many fish you can catch sometimes on a different bait. And that's kind of something that I always look up to the bass guys. Like I said earlier, here in Manitoba and Ontario, some of the best walleye fishermen are the bass guys, and that's because I think they're more willing to dabble into some new techniques and new baits. Where walleye people sometimes can, stick to the spinners and the crawler harnesses, and just like I said earlier, maybe a spot tail shiner and a jig, which is great. It works, but sometimes trying something new is always exciting.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The other thing that I love about the Ned rig is, it's got that plastic on it. Do you call it a stick bait? Is that what it is? It's kind of a plain, no offense to people who make them, but they're kind of plain. So often you think about putting on a plastic, you have to have the action of the tail. Is it wiggly? Is it, get a twisty tail on there, that it's got all kinds of action. How does it swim? But I think there is so much to be said about the way that the Ned rig falls, that the action that fall has, and then just the color that you put on that. So be it something super attractive and bright or something super natural, going back to that match the hatch. It's working this year.
Yeah, you know what? I agree. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things as well. And you know what? It just comes down to making sure you've got the presentation and the baits in front of their face. And if they're feeding, they're going to bite it, right? So that's the great thing. And again, gluing those plastics on, not having to worry about rebaiting every single time you have a hit, because oftentimes when you're fishing a tournament or you're fishing, competitively with your buds, right? You got that big walleye, you can see him on the graph, and you get that bite and you miss it, then you reel it up and you got to rebait, and then of course 2 seconds later your buddy catches it, right? And you're like, oh. So sometimes that's one of those advantages I mentioned at the beginning of the show, just having something that you might get 3 or 4 good solid bites before, and hopefully it doesn't take more than 2, more than 1, but at least that there's a good chance you're going to have that on there, right?
Yeah, that is for sure. So I guess with that, we do have quite a few people checking in to say hello to you tonight. Eric, always a pleasure to fish with Glenn. You're very knowledgeable. And Amy's checking in, so hello to you as well. If you are at home and you're watching as well, if you have questions or anything along the way, put that in that comment box, because we would love to talk about that as well. And let us know what you're thinking. So. Mm-hmm. With that, we kind of had a little map here that you had sent us. Is this a good time to bring that up?
Sure. I stole most of these spots from my buddy Dan, who's probably on the show tonight. So I rated his graph tonight and made sure to take some of his best spots from Lake Winnipeg.
All right,
that's awesome.
So we're gonna move out from our area here, and we're going to go up north, right over to Winnipeg.
There we go. Yeah, so if we look down on the right part, you'll see the Winnipeg River system, coming out, flowing into Lake Winnipeg. So Pine Falls area has been a popular fishing destination in the fall. There's been a tournament there for the last 25 years or even maybe longer. It's produced some really big walleye, 30 plus inch walleye, 10, 12 pound walleye. There's been a lot of people who've come from all over Canada to fish that tournament. And so Pine Falls has kind of been known as a really strong fall fishing spot, but few years ago, we started fishing it in the spring as well, just because, we knew there were fish there. And so just like, hey, let's go and check it out. It's not that far of a drive. So we focused a little bit further out. While you move out to the west, Josh, you'll notice there's a little island on the northwest part there. It's called Elk Island right up there. So, we'll fish anywhere between Pine Falls up to Elk Island. We've got to be very careful. One thing that I want to talk about tonight is Lake Winnipeg, whether it be in the wintertime or in the summertime. It's not a lake to take any chances on. There's Lake Winnipeg's got a lot of nasty nicknames. One of them is Big Windy, but it can be a really, really dangerous lake to be on. So a few years ago, fishing one of the Pine Falls tournaments, there were a few people that were taking big waves over their boat. So you've got to be careful. You got to kind of know your elements. So if you're not familiar with the area, I'd say probably go out with a buddy. Make sure you've got a couple boats and make sure you're paying attention to the wind. Whether you're going on Windfinder or whatever. So Elk Island, that whole area back east towards the Winnipeg River system is a pretty good spot. You want to look for kind of structure, any kind of boulders underneath. There's lots of gravel bottoms and stuff, but if you can find boulders where they're using Mega 360 or down imaging, it's a great little technique to use. And just bouncing your jig off of a rock or a boulder, for whatever reason, seems to really trigger a bite. Mm-hmm. And having that strong current, as I mentioned earlier, coming from the east out flowing into Lake Winnipeg. So that's been a really popular fall spot, as I mentioned earlier. There's, like I said, a couple walleye tournaments in the fall that have really been successful and they're well attended. And then as we move further west, northwest, you get into that Gimli, Hecla Gull Harbor area. And as I said earlier, that area has really taken off in the last 5 years. There's a lot of anglers spending, weekends, weekdays, trying to get, playing hooky from work if you can, getting up to that area. And yeah, exactly. That area there, Josh, you want to get into the current again, as I mentioned earlier. If there's a strong current and you've got a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce, or 1 ounce jig, you're going to do really well. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show too, just really paying attention to those bait balls that are coming through and figuring out what depth they're at and kind of trying to mimic that.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you're hearing about the current, because so often, especially if people are visiting an area, current is intimidating. And I think a lot of times people get into different areas and they're like, oh, there's a lot of current here. Maybe we should move. I don't know if that's the ease of the angler or what they think they should be doing with the fish. But as far as your feedback, that's really, really helpful to know that tends to be a place where those fish will be.
Yeah, you know what? I've been fishing the current for a long time. I started fishing in the Winnipeg River system more east towards Manaki. I had a good buddy who had a cottage out there. So we used to spend a couple weeks every year. And it's tough. You go through a lot of jigs or a lot of crawler harnesses when you're fishing current, because if you can't feel bottom, it's not a good thing, right? But there's so many walleye. They love the current. They love to stick back in those eddies, and, they're waiting for bait fish to go by. So fishing current's a lot of fun. And if you can have the proper boat control today and it's pretty easy, let's be honest, the electronics today are they're out of this world, right? I mean, have iPilot and have all those, that coordinating with your graphs, we're spoiled today compared to what it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's for sure. And with that, Steve is here saying thanks for the shout out to Pine Falls. Don't give away all of our spots. That's the thing though, is people, first of all, probably cannot travel there yet. So no worries. The other thing though is, even once you're in those areas, as somebody who would be traveling there, I mean, that's still pretty generic area. So to whittle down those spots, like you're saying, you still need to find that substrate that fish are looking for. Is it a flat? Is it rocks? Is it, is it the river? Is it the current? There's still so many different factors. And once you've got all that down, then you've still got to narrow down the bait. So either that or rewind this episode.
Absolutely. Well, one of the great things about Manitoba, and I mean this sincerely, we're fortunate. We've got great guiding companies here in Manitoba who really specialize, whether it's hard water or open water. And if someone who's coming from afar is not sure, the best suggestion is to get on Travel Manitoba, research a guide, find someone that's got some great reviews, and book a guide, and they'll take you out for a fish of a lifetime, whether, it's going out for some of those large walleye or, we've got lake trout fishing. There's just so much fishing in Manitoba and Northwestern Ontario. We're just spoiled rotten, to be honest with you. So we've got some great guides, and they're easy to find.
Well, and that's a really great tip because there is honestly so much to learn from a guide. But we do also have a question here about fishing it yourself because some people choose that as well. So Randy's saying you've had such great success at the Kenora Walleye Open at Lake of the Woods. Would you share some insight or tips on your strategy for pre-fishing such a huge body of water?
Well, Randy's being too kind because the last time I checked, Randy finished a lot higher in the last tournament that we fished. Randy's a great guy. You know what? One of the things that I've noticed with Lake of the Woods specifically is like simple is better. And I know sometimes we want to tie these big fancy crawler harnesses and whatnot, but the most success that I've had with one of my fishing partners who's actually on the call tonight, or than Phil Burley, is fishing leeches. Drop shotting, or fishing a small 1/8 ounce jig. I've got one kind of tied up here tonight with an impulse leech. This is a really, really good standby bait that we use. And you know what, Randy? Just keeping it simple, using those light jigs. Let the leech do kind of the work for you. One thing that we learned last year at the Lake of the Woods Kenora Walleye Open, Burley and I, is we were focusing a lot on those deep water humps. And, unless you've got a pattern and you know exactly kind of what's happening and where they're going to feed, you can kind of be at a disadvantage because the tournament last year was pushed back by a month because of the pandemic. Usually the tournament's the first week of July and it was in August. Wow. And so confidence wise, my fishing partner and I, we didn't have a lot of confidence. We were hoping our regular places, we kind of have a route that we follow, a gravy route, so to speak, where we got our walleye. But last year, surprisingly, our best slots actually happened in shallow water, in like 10, 15 feet of water, just hanging around those points. And maybe it's because they don't get fished often. I'm not sure. But yeah, you know what, just kind of keeping it simple and looking for some shallow water walleye. I think sometimes you're going to get the best slot fish, and you need 3 really good slots to win that tournament each day. So.
Well, and if nothing else works, then I'll tell you what, you take that little black leech bait, you throw it out for some crappies because you'll catch them.
But to kind of shadow what you were saying, Glenn, I mean, when you're breaking down big bodies of water like that, the best thing to do is just to section it up and make sure that you have, you pick out your strengths as far as a fisherman, whether that's fishing flats or fishing points. Pick out just small spots. Don't look at the whole lake. And then when you find a spot that's working, just try and mimic that. So you're not fishing the whole lake necessarily. You're just fishing the types of structure that you're good at fishing. I think, Emily and I use that a lot around here because we have, Lake Winnebago. We have the Bay of Green Bay. And like you said, another thing is for walleyes, when you're going shallow, we were just discussing this with another guest on a previous show. Walleyes will go up shallow to digest. So they'll go up into the warm water, 3-4 feet of water even sometimes, and they'll digest all the food. But if a little tiny leech bait comes past their face, they're not going to pass it up. They're already up there digesting. So, don't pass those shallow areas up for walleye too.
Yeah, it's kind of like, Thanksgiving dinner after you've eaten and you're sitting at the, at the TV, maybe watching some sports, and then someone goes by with a dessert menu. You're like, well, hold on a second. Maybe I will have a piece of cake. You weren't really thinking about it, but you're like, you know what, maybe I will. So, yeah.
I love what you're saying because actually that's what we call it, is the Jello Theory. So this is probably a whole made up thing, but we find ourselves talking about it a lot because I'm not saying that Jello is the best dessert out there, but exactly like you're saying, that dessert tray goes by and there's always room for dessert.
There's always room for dessert, yeah. And I think too, like you said earlier about a big body of water, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, you fish in memory too, right? And that's kind of what happened last year at the KWO. You're thinking, wow, you know what, we've got 2 or 3 days of quality pre-fishing, and you want to hit all those spots you've done really well at, but you kind of have it in the back of your mind that I'm not sure if they're going to be there. So, you got to try to your point, break down the lake and try to find some different spots. But, we did get our 2 overs, which we needed each day. And surprisingly, both times they were actually, I wasn't sure if anybody was going to ask, but Randy, I'll give you one little hint, bud, because you're a great guy. Think the world of you. That bait right there, we were cranking over some points, and these tail dancers, these 30-foot tail dancers, Burley actually popped both of them. And the interesting part Josh, you just mentioned about, how sometimes those walleye are going to go into the shallow areas. Both times it was in less than 10 feet of water, because I looked at Burley and I said, I think you're hooked. And I'm like, actually, no, your rod's pumping. You got a big walleye on. So, you know what? It was just interesting last year that we caught some really good fish in some shallow water. So it's good times. And you don't have to worry about managing fish that come out of the shallow water, because when you're catching walleye in 30 feet, you've got a lot of babysitting to do all day to make sure, they're healthy, and, you're making sure to monitor the temperature in your live well and whatnot. So fishing in a little bit of shallow water sometimes is easier to manage the fish as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think a lot of times people are either focusing on fish to eat or fish to release right away, but there are those cases where, you're holding on to them, or tournaments, you want those fish to be just as good a quality as when you picked them out, so that next time you can go back and do it again. So good points.
Yeah, all about the conservation. You want to make sure you're being respectful. And, as I said earlier, we're lucky enough to have some really quality fish in the lake, and you want to make sure you're protecting the future of those fisheries as well, right? So
yeah, that's absolutely for sure.
Yeah.
And I was kind of making fun of you before the show, because when I think of Canada, I just imagine part of me. Tell the answer's got it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. When I think of Canada, I think of you guys must have ice 3/4 of the year, but that's really not true. And honestly, at least where you're at, you have some pretty typical seasons, a lot like what we do in the Midwest here. So we're talking ice, we're talking boating. I love how you're bringing up this point, to come and visit. Well, hopefully people can at some point, visit in the summer, because so often people think of you guys for ice. And what's nice is that you have striker gear for both of those seasons.
Absolutely. We sure do. My favorite striker ice gear this year, or striker gear this year, has probably been the new performance shorts. These tournament shorts are fantastic, especially when you're a bigger guy like me and you're getting, you're down on your knees, you're weighing the fish, you're checking to make sure everything's fine, you're back up again. You don't have to worry about the waistband cutting in. So they've got a lot of elasticity. And you know what? Last weekend, I actually cut my finger. We caught a big pike when we were bass fishing. And I looked down and my shorts were full of blood. And I was like, oh, crap, I just got these new shorts, right? But just a little bit of water and it rinsed right off. So I was really impressed. But yeah, I love the new tournament shorts, and I love the new graveyard shirts as well. And it's kind of odd that I would say that, because I'm actually a licensed funeral director. So I look after people at the hardest time of their life. So I don't broadcast that I wear the graveyard shirt, but I'm using it for fishing.
So I have a quick question about the tournament shorts. Did you notice right away on the inside of both knees, there's a little vent?
Yes.
Okay, so the first time I wore mine, I was fishing and we're sitting there trolling, and I put my hands on my knees, and for one, they're long enough to cover my knees so I don't get the lobster knees. But I put my hands there and I'm like, oh crap, I have ripped in my pants already, and I'm looking at it and it was actually vents, and it was awesome. I love those shorts.
They are, like I said, I've worn a lot of shorts fishing over the years. They are by far my favorite shorts. And, we're lucky, again, as I mentioned, Lake of the Woods headquarters, which is one of our premier tackle shops here in Winnipeg and also in Kenora. They carry the whole striker line, a lot of summer gear. So if you're looking for some really comfortable summer wear, head down to the store and pick up some of the new striker stuff. That's first class.
Well, and I want to say that, you're talking about the graveyards, similar actually to what both of you are wearing tonight. It does not have a hood. It's a nice light material, something that's just great to wear, in summer. Or my favorite thing is it's one of the best base layers for ice season, because all this summer stuff, right now I'm wearing a Burr shirt, it's a cooling shirt. I would not recommend that one, but all of this other gear is very, very quick dry. It's wicking. And that's the kind of thing that you want as a base layer, under your ice stuff as well. So we're talking about summer and how great these products are now, but this is not something that you have to put away for ice season. And actually, as long as it's still going on, I hope I'm giving good information. I heard that there was a sale recently, and I saw graveyards were included in that sale.
Wow. Well, absolutely. That's great. A couple of years ago, I was fishing the Pine Falls tournament, and it was nasty weather. And, a couple of my buddies said, well, make sure we dress warm. And I was wearing the Predator suit, And I was happy I did, because like I said, we took a few waves over, and I wasn't complaining at the end of the day. I was warm and dry. And so there's, sometimes we think about the Predator and the hard water suit as only being for hard water, but there's a lot of people that like to fish, especially here in Manitoba. They like to fish Pine Falls right till ice up, as best they can anyways. So
yeah, that's absolutely a great point because, I got to say the ice suits are really meant for ice and rain suits really are meant for, open water and rain. But there is that part of the season where there is water for boats, but it is really cold enough that you need that winter gear. And I have to say that I have been one of those people that has been totally lucky enough that, water doesn't really get through. So they say that it's not advertised for that, but I also, it's great gear for that multi-purpose opportunity, like you're saying. So, and talk about a comfortable suit for even sitting in the boat.
And not to mention all the pockets. I miss my pockets during the summertime.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Sometimes when you're fishing, especially when it's when the water's really cold, you don't like what happens if you do end up overboard, right? So you've got that flotation as well, plus your life jacket. So it's just an added layer of protection. So it's great. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get you up to Canada and up to Lake Winnipeg, and we'll show you the ropes.
Yeah.
Or ice season, whatever comes first, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So for people who, maybe think of questions after the show, or for people who want to keep following you on your adventures, how do they do that?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at TeamOtter88, or you can find me on Facebook at my name, Glen Talbot. Feel free to reach out on Messenger or on Instagram. And you'd love to answer questions and point you in the right direction. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, and thank you again for being here. We've had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to seeing you hopefully in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And for the people at home, thank you for being here as well. It's been a lot of fun with you guys. Love hearing your comments and questions and all the additions to the show. So if you do think of anything, you can continue to post here. If it's anything that we can pass on to Glen. Otherwise, I know he's kind of checking social media too. So thank you at home for being here with us, and looking forward to next week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
Night, everybody.
Good night.